Hello YouTube, Dave here again. Today I am concluding my series on adjusting monster stats for 5th edition using sort of 4th edition concepts that I wish would have carried forward. Previously in the series I looked at creating minions as well as elite creatures. Today I'm going to be taking a look at solo monsters. Now when it comes to solo monsters, they're really meant to be sort of the climactic battle at the end of an adventure, or even at the end of an adventure arc. You want it to be an encounter that is going to be memorable. Now the guidelines for creating solo monsters in the 4th edition Dungeon Master's Guide aren't quite what we're looking for the purposes of this video, but it is something we're going to at least look at and get some sort of ideas for. I like the idea of adjusting hit points based off the number of party members in the group, but we'll get to all that in a moment. Like I said, the steps here are really just going to be a foundation, and I'm going to talk about the methods that I'm going to use personally for creating solo monsters in my campaigns. That's not to say that it's the best way to go about it by any stretch of the imagination. I'm sure just about everyone out there will come up with a better idea than what I have here, but I still want to talk about the process anyway. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to take a look at the steps provided here in the Dungeon Master's Guide. Like I said, we're not going to be using all the steps like we did with the elite creatures. It's going to be a little bit more difficult, I think, or it's going to be a little bit different using or creating a solo creature based off of the 4th edition guidelines, but here we go. So it says for creating new solo monsters. So we're not going to look at the role here because that's something that isn't really pertinent in 5th edition as much. You have things like controller, brute, leader, stuff like that, minion. We're not looking at stuff like that. So this is just going to be basically a solo creature. Now, adjusting hit points. This is something that I found was kind of interesting in the 4th edition version here, but it says a solo monster has hit points equal to 8 times its level plus 1. So I assume if it was like a level 2 creature, it would be 3 times 8, which would be like 24 hit points plus its con score. We're not going to be doing that for this one, but it says if the solo level is 10 or lower, multiply that result by 4 for its final hit points. If it's 11 or higher, multiply that by 5. So that gives you its base hit points, and then you multiply it. Now, we're not going to be doing the base hit point thing. We've already got our hit points in the monster manual. We're going to be using the same orc that we've done before. However, what we're going to do is multiply that result by 4. Now, so you can do that by 4 or by 5. Another handy guideline is you can essentially just multiply the creature's hit points by the size of your party. So if you have a group of like 6 players, for example, you may want to multiply the hit points in the book by 6, or you may want to, again, you're going to have a feel for it. It's essentially a solo creature is effectively a number of creatures equal to, essentially, like in this version, it's equal to 5 creatures. So if we had our standard orc from the 5th edition monster manual, turning it into a solo orc would be the equivalent of having 5 of them in the combat. So that's one way of looking at it. So again, adjusting it by the number of party members also makes sense. You may want to reduce or raise that number based off of how much damage they're capable of putting out or how difficult they are to attack. Things like that. So we're going to be multiplying our hit points by a total of 4. We did by a total of 2 in the last video, so I think an average party size of 4 makes sense, and that's what we're going to go with. Adjust defenses. So this says here, increase up to 3 defenses, including armor class, by 2. Now, we are not going to be applying that to... There's only 1 defense in 5th edition. You only have your armor class, and we're back to regular saving throws. It says here, adjust saving throws. They have a +5 bonus to all saving throws. But in 4th edition, saves were a much rarer thing because you had fortitude, reflex, and will. But instead of them being saving throws, they were essentially just defenses, similar to armor class. So what we're going to do is we're going to ignore the saving throw thing there. But what we are going to do is we are going to adjust armor class and 2 saving throws. We're going to give them a +2 bonus. I'm also going to apply proficiency bonuses to the saving throws as well. Now we're using an orc, so I'm going to be going with strength and constitution as the ones I'm going to modify, and you'll see everything in the finalized stats there. So this says add 1 action point, so we don't do action points by default in 5th edition. I mean, like, the player characters have them, but I don't think any of the monsters do. But there is a mechanic that is already built into 5th edition to allow enemies to take extra actions, and that's essentially what we have here for step 6, is just to give them more abilities that they can do that allow them to interact with the characters more in a combat round. So what we're going to do is, with our 5th edition orc, we are going to give it, I'll go through like the steps here in a moment, but the biggest thing is the built-in mechanic that we have for 5th edition when it comes to giving powerful creatures more interactions in combat is we're going to be giving our solo monster legendary actions. And again, you may want to adjust the number of actions that you give it based on the size of the party. The same thing goes for the hit points, but I really like the legendary action mechanic. I think that was a very, it's a great system, and I thoroughly enjoy it. So that's what we're going to be using for our orc. So we're just going to find our standard orc stat block here. Alright, so once again, here we have our standard orc stat block. So this is the one that we are going to be using. So armor class, we're going to be adjusting that upwards. Now, I believe you kind of want to stack, so I'm going to actually make the armor class probably a little bit higher than just a +2 bonus, just based on the fact that a 15, well, we'll see. I haven't fully decided on that one yet. So hit points, we're going to multiply those hit points, so we got 15. We're also going to be adjusting some attributes once again, like we had with our elite. So the constitution modifier will be +4 instead of +3, so that's going to be a 2d, so that'll be 2d8 + 8, and then we're going to multiply that number by 4. Our strength is also going to be increased, so I'll show all that once I'm done with it there. We might also add a few more skills that they have bonuses to, but I will again be giving them strength and con saving throw proficiencies, and I'm also going to give them an extra +2 bonus on each of those, or we'll see how that shapes up when the time comes. It's still going to have its aggressive action. Its experience points are going to be essentially 4 times, or 5 times, 4 times, yeah, it's going to be 4 times what the standard amount is, so it'll be an experience point award of 400 instead of 100. It's still going to have aggressive as a bonus action, so we're still going to give it that. It's still going to have its regular attacks, but I'm also going to introduce some legendary actions to sort of spice things up as well. Now, this is where you get a chance to be very creative, because the thing that I really like about 4th edition and 5th edition monsters in D&D is that they're no longer constrained to the same abilities that you would have to give, like say from 3rd edition, where NPCs and villains were sort of basically made. Anything humanoid was essentially made the same way that a player character was, only they had less resources in terms of like gold pieces for treasure, for magic and stuff like that. So we are going to, so with 4th and 5th edition, you could just give them unique and interesting abilities. And I think that's something that is definitely a strength for the later editions, is the fact that monsters can be more customized and they can be more interesting. So I'm going to be giving it 3 action points, and I'm going to be giving it 3 different actions that it can take. One which will have a cost of 1, one which will have a cost of 2, and the third one will have a cost of 3, and it'll get certain actions based off of that. So I'm going to go through and make those modifications. So increase some stats, multiply hit points by 4, increase some saving throws, probably throw in some extra skills, and the legendary actions. So I will be back once I'm done all of that with the final version. Alright, so here we have the finished product. So for this one, I decided to name this an Orc Warlord. So just going through all of the numbers here. So we just have the Orc Warlord. Again, my handwriting is atrocious, I understand that. Unfortunately, having issues still with our printer, and it's just not worth trying to go through all the hassle to get one page to print off in faint blue text. So I'm not going to go through that right now. However, so we have this Orc Warlord, medium humanoid orc, chaotic evil. For armor class, so I decided to upgrade the armor from hide armor to breastplate, which normally gives you an armor class of 14. Yeah, so it normally gives you an armor class of 14. Sorry, I just had to think about that for a second. +1 for dexterity would bring it up to 15, and because it's a solo creature, we gave it the +2 adjustment to give it an armor class of 17. We have 68 hit points, so it was 17 hit points multiplied by 4. That gave us 68, and we have a speed of 30 feet. For strength, I wanted to make this orc stronger than the elite version, so I decided to give it a 20 strength, and I'm just using the modifiers here, because whenever I do stat blocks, I don't bother with the full attribute. So here we have strength +5, dex +1, which is the same. Constitution went up from +3 to +4. Intelligence, because this is sort of a leader type character, I decided to give them a 10 intelligence, so they have a 0 modifier instead of like a -2. Wisdom is also +0, but charisma I gave them, because again they're in a leadership position, I gave them a total of +1. Saving throws, I went with strength and con with proficiency bonuses. Plus their attribute modifiers. So we have strength saving throws at +7, constitution saving throws at +6, and because again they are meant to be a tougher enemy for a party to overcome, I did decide to go with a wisdom saving throw, giving them proficiency in that as well. So the proficiency bonus is +2, so that works perfectly fine there. For skills, they have Intimidate, so it's +3 because 2 for proficiency, +1 for charisma. And then for sense motive, I also gave them that as well, in case the characters try to bluff their way through an interaction with the Orc Warlord. They'll have a better chance of knowing when someone's plotting something. I think it's an important skill for, again, leaders to have, especially leaders who are only leaders because they are currently the strongest, so they want to know what's going on around them. And perception, I gave proficiency in as well. Senses, we have dark vision of 60 feet, passive perception of 12. Languages, I gave them common and orc, which is normal, but I also threw in giant as well, because they may be dealing with like ogres or hill giants or stuff like that as well. XP value, I decided to multiply the experience point value by 5, sticking with the 4th edition version of having a solo monster be worth 5 regular monsters. So that's sort of what I went with. Even though the hit points are only multiplied by 4, I still felt that it was appropriate to give them the extra experience points because, again, how things are going to turn out. So it still has aggressive as its ability, so as a bonus action, it can move up to its speed towards a hostile creature that it can see. For actions, we have multi-attack, so it can make 2 attacks with its Great Axe or Javelin. Then we have Great Axe or Javelin. Both of them use strength, so +7 to hit, 2 for proficiency, 5 for strength. Reach 5 feet, 1 target, and on a hit, it's 1d12 +5 slashing for the Great Axe, or with the Javelin, it's 1d6 +5 piercing, and it can also be thrown at a range of 30, like the range categories are 30, up to 30 feet for close range, and up to 120 feet for long range and 1 target. So then we gave it the legendary actions. So this is, again, the thing that's going to set this apart from standard orcs. And this is where, again, you can have a little bit of fun and just come up with things that you think might work. So the Orc Warlord can take 3 legendary actions, choosing from the options below. Only 1 legendary action can be used at a time, and only at the end of another creature's turn. The Orc Warlord regains spent legendary actions at the start of its turn. And, whoops, there is one thing I forgot to do here. So let's just, well, I'll get to that when the time comes up, because I forgot to do the action cost for the final one. So the first legendary action is just simply a weapon attack. It just uses one of the 1 legendary action, and the Orc Warlord makes a Great Axe or Javelin attack. So they can make a melee strike with their Great Axe, or they can throw their Javelin if they decide to do so. The second one I went with is called Charge. So the Orc Warlord moves up to double its speed towards a hostile creature it can see. If the Orc Warlord ends its movement in melee range, it may make a melee weapon attack, and that costs 2 actions. And then the final one, which I'm just going to Just fix that right now. And then the final one I went with, whoops, is Whirlwind Attack. So Whirlwind Attack says the Orc Warlord swings his great axe in a mighty arc, spinning 360 degrees. I had two different things I was considering here. One was just a series of attack rolls against everyone in melee range. I was either going to do separate attacks for each, or just roll one attack roll and apply it to each individual's armor class. So that's one thing that I was considering. But the other is that this is going to be a very powerful swing, in which he's swinging his great axe sort of around him in this full 360-degree circle. And there's going to be a lot of momentum and strength and force behind it. So what I decided to go with in this situation is each creature within 5 feet must succeed on a DC 15 dexterity saving throw. So the DC is determined by the standard of 8 plus proficiency bonus, and because this is a strength-based kind of attack, I threw in the strength modifier as well. So 8 plus proficiency of plus 2 gives you 10, plus 5 for strength is DC 15 dexterity saving throw, or you take 2d12 plus 5 damage. So it's sort of as if they had the brute ability, because again, this is a very powerful attack. So they would take 2d12 plus 5 slashing damage on the failed saving throw, or half as much on a successful one. So it's still going to be difficult to not take anything, but this also costs all 3 of their actions. So if the Orc Warlord were to use that attack, that would be all of its legendary actions for the round. Now, again, that's something you can modify. Like I said, that's just something I thought might be an interesting ability. I might consider reducing it down to 1d12 plus 5, or I might do like 1d12 plus maybe like double the strength bonus, or 1.5 times the strength bonus. So there's definitely room to sort of alter that if you decide that might be a bit too powerful. But again, remembering that this is a single enemy that is being attacked by the entire party. So this is something that, again, and the other goal with this kind of design, for me at least, is I want enemies to feel tougher. I want them to feel like more of a threat, which is something that 5th edition can sometimes kind of lack with a lot of the creatures. They just feel a bit too soft. They feel a bit too easy to defeat. And honestly, 68 hit points sounds like a lot if you have a group of like 2nd or 3rd level characters, but you still have, 4 to 6 players, or up to 7 if you're doing this like, for like Adventurers League sort of sized groups, all attacking one creature. So I think it will all even out. And, 2d12 plus 5 sounds like a lot, and it has the potential to be a lot, but it can also, you can also roll really poorly on those numbers. And because it's not an attack roll, it's never going to crit. So it's just kind of like throwing caution to the wind and having it so that it's a powerful attack. Now, another thing that I've considered, and I might alter in this, is that if this attack is used until the end of its next turn, it grants advantage on attack rolls against it. So that's something else that you can consider. There's lots of room to sort of adjust things here. But that's how I would tackle creating a solo monster. And I think that this would be a lot of fun to throw up against a group of player characters. I think it'd be a lot of fun to do that with. And again, like I said, that last one sounds like a lot, but this takes the place of 5 different orc creatures. So it's still the potential for the players to be taking a lot of damage if they fight 5 orcs and have to spread their attacks out over the course of all of them, or one that can just hit them for a significant amount of damage. And this ability really only comes into play, honestly, if you are if you're surrounding it. Like if the players decide not to swarm it, and you have characters attacking at range using spells or ranged attacks, and you only have 1 or 2 melee fighters, it might not be worth using this ability when you can use the 2 regular attacks and like an extra weapon attack or the charge attack, things like that. So there's definitely things to consider in that as well. So this is definitely sort of a conditional thing where you're looking at a swarm. But again, this is just my idea, and I'm not saying that these abilities should be used by anyone. They're just sort of the concept that I had. But anyway, that is how I would make a solo monster for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. Let me know in the comments below what are some of the suggestions that you might have. What are some of the creatures that you might alter to be more like challenging for elite, solo, or even make them easier for minions. One other thing to consider also is that if you are running this solo type of creature for a larger group, instead of multiplying the hit points by the number of players in the group, you could also throw in a group of minions or even one standard monster, 1 or 2 standard monsters of the same type, just to pad out the combat a little bit if your group is larger than the standard size. But I think that overall this would probably work, and I think for a group of like I said, 2nd to 3rd level characters, this would make for a very challenging sort of final boss type of creature. And again, this is something that I would use at the end of a story arc, and not necessarily at the end of just a regular dungeon. Like, this would be an enemy that they would be going after for a while. So they would be chasing them and then finally catch up to them and have, well, hopefully, will be an interesting and memorable knockdown, drag-out fight. So, thanks again for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I look forward to reading your comments below as well. And I'll see you next time. Until then, take care.